What if Prince Harry's most famous project is facing the biggest test in its history? Because in this video, we're going to look at the growing controversy surrounding the Invictus Games, the criticism coming from some commentators and viewers, the questions being asked about funding and public perception, and why so many people online are suddenly debating the future of an event that was once seen as one of Harry's greatest achievements. We'll examine the comments, the concerns, and the arguments from both supporters and critics. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to decide for yourself whether this is simply another online controversy or whether the Invictus Games are facing a genuine challenge. And before we begin, if you enjoy royal family news, royal commentary, and the biggest Harry and Meghan stories making headlines around the world, subscribe to Sussex Tea and join thousands of royal watchers who never want to miss the next big story. Now, let's get into it. For years, the Invictus Games were considered one of Prince Harry's greatest accomplishments. Even many people who disagree with Harry on other issues often praise Invictus. The reason was simple. The focus wasn't on royal drama. It wasn't on celebrity culture. And it certainly wasn't on social media controversies. The focus was on wounded veterans, men and women who had sacrificed for their countries and were now rebuilding their lives through sport, competition, and community. That mission earned respect around the world. Governments supported it. Corporations sponsored it. Media outlets celebrated it. And Prince Harry received enormous credit for helping bring attention to the cause. But recently something has changed. And if you've been reading the comments online, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Because more and more people aren't discussing the athletes anymore. They're discussing Harry. They're discussing Meghan. They're discussing money. And they're asking difficult questions about the future of the games. Now, before we go any further, it's important to be fair. The Invictus Games remain an important event for many veterans. Thousands of competitors have participated over the years. Countless inspiring stories have emerged from the competition, and many people continue to support the mission wholeheartedly. But that hasn't stopped criticism from growing. And some of that criticism is becoming impossible to ignore. Recently, I started reading through hundreds of comments posted beneath videos discussing Invictus. At first, I expected the usual royal family arguments. Supporters defending Harry, critics attacking Harry, the same debates we've seen for years. But something stood out. The comments weren't focused on royal gossip. They were focused on the games themselves. One commenter wrote, "The games need to be canceled." Another wrote, "The Invictus Games should be dissolved." Another viewer argued that the games need stronger leadership. Others questioned funding. Others questioned priorities. And suddenly a pattern began to emerge. People weren't merely criticizing Harry. They were questioning whether the organization itself was heading in the right direction. Now, does that mean Invictus is actually in trouble? Not necessarily. Internet comments don't tell the whole story, but they do reveal something important. Public perception. And perception matters. Because public trust is one of the most valuable assets any charity, foundation, or international organization can possess. Once that trust begins to weaken, difficult questions usually follow. Questions about leadership. Questions about spending. Questions about priorities. Questions about accountability. And that's exactly what appears to be happening right now. The biggest concern repeatedly mentioned by critics involves money. Not because anyone disputes the importance of helping veterans. Quite the opposite. Most critics actually begin from the same position. They support veterans. They want veterans to receive more support. They want veterans to have opportunities. The disagreement begins when people ask where resources are going and whether enough of those resources are reaching the people the games were created to help. And this is where the debate becomes increasingly emotional. Because once veterans enter the conversation, people stop viewing the issue as ordinary royal gossip. The stakes suddenly feel higher. Much higher. That's why every new article, every interview, and every comment section now seems to generate intense discussion. People care deeply about this issue. And when people care deeply about something, emotions tend to rise quickly. But perhaps the biggest challenge facing Invictus today isn't money. And it isn't sponsorship. It might actually be attention. Because many critics argue that the spotlight has gradually shifted away from competitors and toward personalities. Whether that's a fair criticism is something viewers continue debating. But the criticism exists. And it appears frequently. Some people believe media coverage spends too much time discussing Harry and Meghan. Others argue that celebrity attention actually helps bring awareness to the cause. Both sides make points worth considering. On one hand, celebrity involvement can attract media coverage that veterans might not otherwise receive. On the other hand, if headlines become dominated by celebrity stories, critics argue the athletes risk becoming secondary characters in their own event. And that's where the conversation becomes complicated, because there are no easy answers. The challenge is finding a balance between visibility and mission, a balance between publicity and purpose, a balance between attracting attention and maintaining focus. And according to some observers, that balance may be getting harder to maintain. The reason is simple. Harry and Meghan remain two of the most discussed public figures in the world. Every appearance generates headlines. Every photograph creates discussion. Every speech becomes a news story. Every controversy becomes global news. As a result, any event associated with them inevitably attracts additional attention. Sometimes that attention is positive. Sometimes it's negative. But attention is guaranteed. And that reality creates a unique challenge for Invictus. Because the event itself may be judged not only on its own performance, but also on broader public opinions about Harry and Meghan. Fair or unfair, that's the environment the games now operate within. And some commentators believe that reality is becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. The question is no longer simply, are the games helping veterans? Most people agree they are. The question becoming louder is, can the games continue growing while navigating all of this controversy? And that question takes us directly into the next part of the story. Because when critics discuss Invictus today, they often return to one topic again and again. Funding. Where's the money coming from? Where is it being spent? And why are so many people suddenly talking about finances? Because according to several commentators, that's where some of the biggest concerns are beginning to emerge. And what we'll look at next may explain why the debate surrounding Invictus has become more intense than ever before. If there is one topic that keeps appearing whenever people discuss the future of the Invictus Games, it's money. Not because people oppose a mission, not because people don't support veterans, but because whenever large organizations face challenges, people inevitably begin asking financial questions. And that's exactly what's happening now. Across social media, comment sections, podcasts, YouTube channels, and royal discussion forums, one subject keeps returning: funding. Where does the money come from? How is it spent? And can the games continue growing in an increasingly difficult financial environment? Now, before we continue, it's important to remember something. Hosting an international sporting event is incredibly expensive. Even events much smaller than the Olympics require enormous resources: venues, transportation, security, staff, medical services, accommodation, broadcasting, technology, insurance, logistics. The costs add up quickly. Most viewers only see the finished product, the opening ceremonies, the competitions, the medals, the inspiring stories. What they don't see is the enormous machine operating behind the scenes. And that machine costs money. A lot of money. That's why every major sporting event depends on a combination of funding sources: sponsors, donors, governments, partnerships, corporate support, private contributions. Without those things, events simply cannot survive. The question critics are asking is whether Invictus can continue attracting the same level of support it once enjoyed. Some commentators have argued that sponsorship challenges may become one of the biggest issues moving forward. Others disagree and believe the games remain strong enough to attract support because of their mission. Again, opinions vary dramatically, but the debate itself has become increasingly visible, and public perception matters. Because organizations don't just compete for funding, they compete for trust. Every sponsor wants confidence. Every donor wants confidence. Every partner wants confidence. Confidence that their support will create positive results. Confidence that their investment will help achieve the organization's goals. Confidence that the public views the project positively. That's why reputation becomes such a valuable asset. And that's where some observers believe Invictus faces its greatest challenge. Not because people oppose veterans. Almost nobody does. But because discussions surrounding Harry and Meghan often create intense reactions. For better or worse, they remain deeply polarizing public figures. Supporters defend them passionately. Critics oppose them passionately. And that polarization inevitably follows every project connected to them. Think about it. Imagine you're a company considering sponsorship. Your marketing team asks one question: how will the public react? If the reaction is overwhelmingly positive, sponsorship becomes attractive. If the reaction is highly divided, the decision becomes more complicated. That's simply the reality of modern branding. And some analysts believe that reality is becoming increasingly relevant to Invictus, not because of the athletes, not because of the mission, but because public conversations often drift toward royal controversies rather than veteran achievements. That distinction matters a lot, because every minute spent discussing controversy is a minute not spent discussing competitors. And competitors are supposed to be the heart of the games. This brings us to another criticism appearing frequently in online discussions: the perception that media attention has shifted. Many viewers argue that coverage often focuses more on celebrity appearances than athletic achievements. Again, supporters disagree. They argue celebrity attention generates awareness. More awareness means more coverage. More coverage means more donations. More donations mean more opportunities for veterans. It's a reasonable argument. But critics counter with a different perspective. They believe excessive focus on personalities risks overshadowing the very people the event was designed to celebrate. And that's why the debate continues. Both sides believe they're protecting the mission. They're simply disagreeing about the best way to do it. The issue becomes even more complicated when social media enters the picture. 20 years ago, organizations could largely control public messaging. Today, that's impossible. Every attendee has a smartphone. Every event generates thousands of photos, thousands of videos, thousands of opinions. And within minutes, those opinions spread across the internet. One viral clip can shape public perception. One controversial headline can dominate discussions. One comment can trigger thousands of responses. That's the world Invictus now operates in. And it's a world very different from the one that existed when the games first launched. Some commentators believe that shift has fundamentally changed the challenge facing the organization. It's no longer enough to host successful events. Organizations must also manage public narratives. And public narratives are notoriously difficult to control, especially when famous personalities are involved. That's why some viewers believe the future of Invictus depends on one key question. Can the game successfully refocus public attention on veterans? Because when supporters talk about Invictus, that's what they consistently return to. The athletes, the stories, the resilience, the recovery, the inspiration. Those elements remain incredibly powerful. In fact, many people argue they're strong enough to overcome any controversy. And they may be right. After all, the mission itself remains compelling. Helping wounded veterans rebuild confidence through sport is an idea that resonates with people around the world. The challenge is ensuring that mission remains at the center of every conversation. And according to critics, that's becoming increasingly difficult. Now here's where things become especially interesting. Because while critics are raising concerns, supporters continue pointing towards something equally important: results. Over the years, thousands of competitors have participated in the games. Many veterans have spoken positively about their experiences. Families have shared emotional stories. Communities have rallied around competitors. And countless moments of inspiration have emerged from the event. Those successes shouldn't be ignored. In fact, they're a crucial part of the story. Because whenever discussions about funding or leadership arise, supporters often point toward those achievements as evidence that the games remain valuable. And that's a powerful argument. If an organization is changing lives, many people believe it's worth protecting. The real debate isn't whether veterans deserve support. Everyone agrees they do. The debate is about how that support should be delivered, how resources should be managed, how leadership should operate, and how public trust should be maintained. Those questions are far more complicated, and there are no simple answers. What is clear, however, is that public scrutiny appears to be increasing. And whenever scrutiny increases, pressure follows. Pressure on leadership, pressure on sponsors, pressure on organizers, pressure on everyone involved. The next question is whether that pressure will lead to meaningful changes. Because history shows that organizations often evolve when faced with criticism. Sometimes those changes strengthen them. Sometimes they create new challenges, and sometimes they completely reshape the future. Which brings us to what may be the most important part of this entire story. The people whose opinions matter most aren't commentators. They're not journalists. They're not YouTubers. And they're not even members of the royal family. They're the public. Because ultimately public perception determines whether support grows or declines. And right now public opinion appears more divided than ever. So in the next part, we're going to look at the growing backlash online, the comments flooding social media, the arguments being made by both supporters and critics, and why the battle for public opinion may ultimately determine the future of Invictus itself. But here's where things get really interesting. Because the biggest challenge facing Invictus might not be funding. It might not be sponsorship. And it might not even be leadership. It might be public perception. Over the last few years, social media has completely changed how major organizations are viewed. People no longer rely solely on newspapers or television. They share clips. They post opinions. They debate in comment sections. And those conversations can spread incredibly fast. When discussions about Invictus appear online, one thing becomes immediately clear. Public opinion is divided. Supporters argue that the Games continue to inspire veterans around the world. They point to success stories. They point to competitors whose lives have been positively impacted. And they argue that those achievements matter far more than internet drama. Critics see things differently. Many believe the focus has shifted away from veterans and toward celebrity coverage. Whether that criticism is fair or not is up for debate. But it is a criticism that appears again and again. Some viewers feel the media spends more time discussing Harry and Meghan than discussing competitors themselves. Others argue that celebrity attention helps attract viewers who might never have heard about the Games otherwise. And that's the central conflict. Both sides claim they want what's best for the veterans. They're simply disagreeing about how to achieve it. Another issue frequently raised online involves trust. People want transparency. They want accountability. And they want confidence that organizations are being managed effectively. Whenever questions arise, even if no clear answers exist yet, discussions tend to grow quickly. That's exactly what appears to be happening now. The result is an online environment where every new headline creates another wave of debate, and every debate creates more questions. The problem for Invictus is that public perception often becomes reality. If enough people start believing an organization is struggling, that belief alone can create challenges. Sponsors pay attention. Media outlets pay attention. Donors pay attention. Everyone watches public sentiment. And right now, public sentiment appears increasingly divided. But does that mean Invictus is in danger? Not necessarily. Many organizations survive criticism. Many organizations adapt. And many organizations emerge stronger after facing difficult questions. The real question is whether Invictus can do the same, because the next few years may determine whether these concerns fade away or whether they become something much bigger. So, what happens next for the Invictus Games? The truth is, nobody knows for sure. Supporters believe the Games will continue making a positive impact on veterans for years to come. Critics believe changes may be needed to rebuild public confidence and keep the focus where it belongs. But regardless of where you stand, one thing is impossible to ignore. The athletes remain the heart of the story. Their determination, their recovery, their resilience. That's what made Invictus special in the first place. And that's what many people want to see protected moving forward. The big question now is whether future headlines will focus on the competitors or continue focusing on controversy and royal drama. Only time will tell. But now I want to hear from you. Do you think the Invictus Games are still as respected as they once were? Should Prince Harry remain the public face of the Games? Or should the spotlight shift entirely to the veterans themselves? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next royal story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.